English and British royals who lost their titles. On October 30th, 2025, Buckingham Palace announced that King Charles III had begun a formal process to remove his brother Andrew's styles, titles, and honors. His name was subsequently removed from the roll of the peerage. Andrew is no longer able to use the title Prince, granted to him at birth, and will henceforth be known as Andrew Mountbatten Windsor. He will also lose his style of His Royal Highness, or HRH, which he hasn't actually used since January 2022, when he was stripped of his patronages and ceased to be a working royal. He has also lost his knighthoods as a Royal Knight Companion of the Order of the Garter and a Knight Grand Cross of the Royal Victorian Order. Andrew's banner of arms was removed from St. George's Chapel, Windsor. It is within the sovereign's rights to remove all of these titles from him. Andrew himself will be removed from the Royal Lodge, the 30-room mansion built in 1840 on the Windsor estate. This was a point of public contention, as the property is part of the Crown Estate, which is owned by the British people, but used by the monarchy. Andrew still has an airtight 75-year lease on Royal Lodge, which allows him to rent it for a symbolic 1 peppercorn per year. However, for public appearance, he will vacate and move to a different luxury property on the Sandringham estate, which is privately owned by the king. 2 weeks earlier, on October 17th, Andrew himself attempted to appease public outcry by announcing that he would no longer use his peerage title, Duke of York, which was granted to him on his wedding day in 1986. Andrew is still technically Duke of York. Only an Act of Parliament can remove a peerage title. The Dukedom of York cannot be granted to anyone else until he dies, and if he had a son, they could claim the title. In case you've been living under a rock, all of this is happening in an effort to assuage public outrage and distance the rest of the royal family from Andrew. He had a relationship with convicted sex traffickers Jeffrey Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell. He was also accused of assaulting Virginia Giuffre when she was 17 and paying her an estimated £12 million in hush money. Andrew's ex-wife, Sarah, was also found to have been friends with and accepted money from Epstein and Maxwell. She has lost her style of Duchess of York and will henceforth be known as Sarah Ferguson. However, their 2 daughters, Beatrice and Eugenie, retain their royal titles and are still princesses. What is surprising about Andrew's fall from grace, from a historic perspective, is that he's actually facing some consequences. In the past, royals who committed crimes were shielded. For instance, in 1810, King George III's 5th son, Ernst Augustus, Duke of Cumberland, was accused of slitting the throat of his valet, Joseph Sellis. Despite public outcry against the prince, Sellis's death was ruled a suicide, and Ernst Augustus went on to become King of Hanover. There are countless other examples from history of royal families using their influence with the media and government to conceal the wrongdoing or negative images of their members, and likely even more that we don't know about because the cover-ups worked. While the public has always enjoyed flinging mud at the royals, it is a rarity that the firm itself excises one of its members. But it is not unheard of. Andrew is in fact not the first prince to lose his title. There have been at least 15 English and British royals from whom titles were stripped or surrendered, including 2 medieval princes who rebelled against their monarch brothers, the long list of women who pissed off Henry VIII, a couple of British princes who sided with Germany during World War I, and a king who gave up his crown to marry his mistress. Let's meet them. Edward II, King of England, was born in 1284 to warrior King Edward I. When his father conquered Wales, he became the first heir to the English throne to be named Prince of Wales. Young Edward had no interest in war, much to his father's devastation. He tried to change his son's character by assigning him a squire who excelled in tournaments, Piers Gaveston, This backfired when Edward and Gaveston fell in love. At Edward's coronation, Gaveston flaunted his influence and wore the Queen's wedding jewelry. This so enraged the nobles that they ran Gaveston through with swords and beheaded him. Edward moved on with an even more conniving favorite, Hugh Despencer. He encouraged the king to attack his own barons and humiliate his queen, Isabella of France. She went home to raise an army with her lover, Roger Mortimer. They invaded England, and as Edward had pissed off the whole country, he didn't have much support. Hugh Despencer was disemboweled, castrated, and quartered. But there was no established procedure for removing an English king from the throne. So a group of barons, clergy, and knights went to the king and informed him that if he resigned as monarch, his son Edward would succeed him. If he refused, his son would be disinherited and the crown given to someone else. In tears, Edward agreed to abdicate. The knights present withdrew their homage, formally ending Edward's reign. 15-year-old Edward III was crowned a few weeks later. The ex-king was imprisoned and most likely murdered on his wife's orders. Rumors spread that he was impaled with a red-hot poker. However, this is most likely a homophobic folktale. Prince Edmund, Earl of Kent, was King Edward II's little half-brother. Their father, Edward I, had intended to give substantial grants of land to Edmund, but when he died, his big bro kept it all for himself. Nevertheless, Edmund remained loyal to his half-brother and played an important role at court. But when Hugh Despencer entered the scene, Edmund found himself even more maligned and disrespected. He gave up on his unappreciative sibling and joined Queen Isabella's rebellion. He was part of the force that invaded England and forced the king to abdicate. But he soon grew disenchanted with the new regime and the power wielded by the Queen and Mortimer. He was caught planning a new rebellion. Edmund was arrested and stripped of his royal titles. He begged his nephew for leniency and offered to walk from Winchester to London with a rope around his neck as a sign of atonement, but Mortimer insisted that he lose his head. No executioners in London were willing to give the chop to a man with royal blood. Eventually, a convicted murderer who had been ordered to clean the tower's latrines took the bloody job in exchange for a pardon. Once Edward III came of age, he posthumously restored his uncle's title and estates to his son. Richard II, King of England, was born in 1367 to Edward III's eldest son, Edward the Black Prince. His father predeceased his grandfather, so in 1377, 10-year-old Richard was crowned. With a third of the population dead in the wake of the Black Death, surviving peasants found that there was more demand for labor than there were people to do it. They abandoned feudal lands in search of better pay and became wealthier than ever. This infuriated the nobles, who imposed laws limiting everything peasants did and taxing them heavily. The peasants revolted and demanded an end to nobility. When the rebel leader Wat Tyler met with the king, he was slain by the mayor of London. The rebels drew their bows, and the 14-year-old king rode forward to calm them. He made a speech asking them to obey him and promising that they would be treated fairly. Amazingly, they believed him and dispersed. They should not have trusted the king. The rebel leaders were hunted down and executed. Now hated by the people, Richard made the nobles hate him as well by pulling out of the war in France that was keeping them rich. Plus, Richard was gay, something his medieval people could never forgive. He was captured by his cousin, Henry. As there was now a precedent for removing an English king, Richard knew he was screwed. He agreed to abdicate if his life would be spared. Henry forced the former king to ride behind him on the humiliating march to London. Richard survived for another 6 months, but when a conspiracy to return him to the throne was uncovered, the ex-king mysteriously died. Most likely, he was starved to death in prison. Prince George Plantagenet, Duke of Clarence, was the younger brother of King Edward IV, who seized the throne from their cousin, King Henry VI, during the Wars of the Roses. He was aided by the powerful Earl of Warwick, known as the Kingmaker. Prince George married the Earl's eldest daughter, Isabel Neville, but Warwick grew jealous of the growing power of Queen Elizabeth Woodville and took up arms against the king. Prince George hoped that the kingmaker would make him king, and he sided with his father-in-law over his brother. But when Warwick married his second daughter, Anne, to Henry VI's son, George realized that the Earl was only out for himself. He secretly reconciled with his brother. Meanwhile, Warwick was killed in battle, and George, via his wife, inherited his lands and titles. Isabel gave birth to a son, but both she and the baby died within weeks. They most likely had tuberculosis, but George was convinced that they'd been poisoned by one of her ladies-in-waiting. Mad with grief, the prince's delicate mental state deteriorated. He bullied a jury into having the lady-in-waiting hanged for murder. Then he hatched new, harebrained plots to seize his brother's throne. He sent servants around the country to stir up rebellion and claimed to have a document signed by Henry VI naming him king. He had a peasant child pose as his son and hired astronomers to use black magic against the king. Edward had had enough of his troublesome sibling. He ordered him committed to the Tower of London and personally prosecuted him for treason. The prince was convicted, stripped of his titles, and privately executed in the Tower. According to legend, he was drowned in a butt of Malmsey wine by his younger brother, the future Richard III. Catherine of Aragon, Queen of England, was born in 1485, the youngest child of Isabel I of Castile and Fernando II of Aragon. At 16, she traveled to England to wed Arthur, Prince of Wales. Within months, the newlyweds fell ill with the sweating sickness. Arthur died, and Catherine lived in limbo for 7 years as a widow with an uncertain future. But when her brother-in-law, Henry VIII, came to the throne, he promptly married the beautiful and intelligent princess. The couple were happy at first. Catherine suffered multiple miscarriages. She gave birth to a son, Henry, Duke of Cornwall, but the baby died of an intestinal malady. Catherine finally delivered a healthy child. However, Henry was disappointed that it was a daughter, Mary, not the male heir he hoped for. After 16 years of marriage, Catherine entered menopause, and Henry transferred his dynastic ambitions to her lady-in-waiting, Anne Boleyn. It was suggested that Catherine quietly retire to a convent, but she refused. Henry obsessed over a passage from Leviticus, which stated that it was a sin to marry your brother's widow, and that such a couple would be childless. But Catherine proclaimed in court that her marriage to Prince Arthur had never been consummated and was therefore unlawful. The Pope refused to grant an annulment. Infuriated, Henry used the Protestant Reformation to make himself head of the new Church of England. He dissolved the monasteries and enriched himself by looting their wealth, much to the horror of devout Catherine. In 1533, her marriage was declared invalid, and she was deprived of her title of queen. She was demoted to Dowager Princess of Wales, her title as Arthur's widow. Her daughter, Mary, was likewise declared illegitimate and lost her title of princess. Catherine was banished to Kimbold Castle, where she lived in misery. Henry refused to allow his ex-wife and daughter to see each other unless they acknowledged the loss of their titles, but they never did. Catherine went to her death at 50, calling herself the king's one true wife. She was buried in Peterborough Cathedral, but it wasn't until the 20th century that Queen Mary of Teck added the banner denoting Catherine as Queen of England. Princess Mary was styled Lady Mary, and her place in the succession was transferred to Henry and Anne's newborn daughter, Elizabeth. Mary's household was dissolved, and she was sent to live with her half-sister. She determinedly refused to acknowledge that Anne was queen or Elizabeth a princess. Her enraged father did not speak to her for years, and the stress caused her frequent illnesses. Anne Boleyn, Queen of England and Marchioness of Pembroke, was the daughter of the Earl of Wiltshire and was styled Lady Anne from birth. She wasn't considered especially beautiful, but she had grown up on the continent and possessed abundant style and sophistication. Her charm and dazzling personality enchanted the king. At first, she resisted his advances. She hoped to marry a gentleman rather than become yet another royal mistress, as many other ladies, including her own sister, had done. But her rejection only fueled Henry's ardor, and eventually she agreed to sleep with him if he would marry her first. It took Henry 7 years of legal battles to secure his annulment from Catherine. He elevated his beloved to Marchioness of Pembroke in her own right, a fitting title for a future queen. When the annulment was nearly final, he and Anne wed in secret and finally consummated their relationship. Now Queen Anne bore a child, but to Henry's disappointment, it was another daughter, Elizabeth. She miscarried her second child. Increasing strife in the marriage, partly due to Anne's refusal to ignore the king's philandering, caused Henry to resent her. Her enemies accused her of adultery and incest with her brother, crimes of which she was certainly innocent. But Henry wanted rid of her, so she was put on trial and found guilty of treason. Her marriage was annulled, and she was stripped of the titles of Queen and Marchioness of Pembroke. Anne was beheaded by sword in the Tower of London. Her body was placed in an arrow box and buried in an unmarked grave in the Tower Chapel. Her 2-year-old daughter, Princess Elizabeth, was likewise declared illegitimate and lost her title. Like her sister, she was known as Lady Elizabeth and grew up semi-estranged from her father as he moved on to more wives in his quest for a male heir. Catherine Howard was just 16 when the now old, overweight, and grumpy king wed her. She was blackmailed by a former confidant who knew that she was not a virgin, having been molested by her music teacher years earlier. Worse, she was actively carrying out an affair, which she may have been coerced into. When Henry was informed of her adultery, he ordered her arrest. The anguished queen tried to run to Henry and beg his mercy, but he refused to see her. Like her cousin Anne, Catherine was found guilty of treason and stripped of her title of queen. The barge that carried her to the Tower passed under London Bridge, where the severed heads of her former abuser, Francis Durham, and lover, Thomas Culpeper, were spiked. Catherine was beheaded by axe and buried near Anne in the Tower Chapel. In 1543, with the encouragement of his 6th and final wife, Catherine Parr, King Henry restored the titles of princess to both of his daughters, Mary and Elizabeth. He welcomed them back to court and reinstated them into the line of succession after his only son, Edward, but they remained legally illegitimate. In 1547, Henry died and Edward VI became king. He was a staunch Protestant and did not want his Catholic sister Mary to follow him on the throne. When the 15-year-old king learned that he was dying of tuberculosis, he and his counselors drew up a will which disinherited both of his sisters and named his cousin Jane Queen of England. She was the granddaughter of Henry VIII's younger sister, Mary Queen of France. The council's scheme to swap Jane for Mary was doomed. Mary was popular and easily raised an army to march to London. She ended Jane's reign after only 9 days. The men who had put Jane in this dangerous position abandoned her. She was arrested, stripped of her title, and imprisoned in the Tower of London. Mary recognized that Jane had been a political pawn and did not wish to execute her. But when a rebellion in Jane's favor frightened Mary's betrothed, Philip of Spain, from coming to England, she signed the death warrant, and the 16-year-old, 9 days queen lost her head. As for Mary and Elizabeth, they each had a chance to restore their birthright and their mother's honors. Mary I reigned until 1558, when she died of uterine cancer at 42. Elizabeth oversaw a golden age in English history and died in 1603. James II of England and 7th of Scotland was the second surviving son of King Charles I. He lost the English Civil War, but was never actually legally deprived of his throne. He went to the scaffold as king, the one and only time a sitting monarch has been executed in England. After his eldest son, Charles II, died without issue, James II inherited the throne at the age of 52. He had converted to Catholicism, outraging his Protestant people. His brother's illegitimate son, James, Duke of Monmouth, rose up in rebellion. But King James squashed it, had his nephew stripped of his titles and beheaded. James had 2 adult daughters, Mary and Anne, both of whom were Protestant. The people held out hope that when James died, Mary would reverse her father's anti-Protestant policies. But then James's second wife, Mary of Modena, gave birth to a son who would be raised Catholic and outrank his sisters in the succession. Parliament wrote secretly to Mary and her husband, William of Orange, and they sailed to London unopposed. King James flung the Great Seal of the realm into the Thames and tried to escape on a boat. He was captured by local fishermen, but not wishing to make a martyr of his father-in-law, William allowed him to flee to France. Because James had abandoned his country, Parliament declared that he had vacated the throne. He was thus replaced by Mary and William, England's only joint monarchs. James and his descendants refused to accept the loss of their titles. They repeatedly drummed up support for campaigns to reclaim the throne, most notably James II in Ireland and his grandson Bonnie Prince Charlie in Scotland. Both rebellions were defeated. The Jacobite pretenders lived in France and Rome and handed out bogus peerage titles to their followers. Prince Ernst Augustus, Duke of Cumberland, was the grandson of Ernst Augustus, King of Hanover, and a great-grandson of King George III. His father, George V, lost his German throne back in 1866, when Prussia annexed Hanover. But he held on to his British titles, Duke of Cumberland and Tividale, plus he was a British prince. While visiting his second cousin, the Prince of Wales, he fell in love with his sister-in-law, Princess Thora of Denmark. They were married in 1878, and Queen Victoria created Ernst a Knight of the Garter and a colonel in the British Army. In 1913, their eldest son, Ernst Augustus, married Kaiser Wilhelm's only daughter, Princess Victoria. Their wedding was the last time Kaiser Wilhelm, King George V, and Tsar Nikolai of Russia met before declaring war. The British royal family had numerous ties to German royalty, which was a very bad look for them. To make it clear where his loyalties lay, George V changed the name of his house from Saxe-Coburg and Gotha to Windsor, his favorite English castle. The Hanovers sided with the Germans in World War I. Ernst Sr. was too old to fight, but Ernst Jr. joined the German army. The British public was outraged that one of their princes had taken up arms against them, so Parliament passed the Titles Deprivation Act of 1917. Both Ernst Augustuses were stripped of their titles of prince, their peerages, and their British knighthoods and military honors. Nevertheless, they maintained friendly relations with their British relatives. Ernst Sr. died in 1923. Adolf Hitler asked Ernst Jr. to spy for him and arrange a marriage between his daughter, Frederica, and Edward, Prince of Wales, but he refused to help the Führer. When Germany lost World War II, the British Army helped to relocate the former prince to Marienburg Castle, out of the path of the Red Army. Ernst lived to see his daughter Frederica marry her cousin Paul and become Queen of Greece. He died in 1953. Prince Charles Edward, Duke of Albany, was born 4 months after his father, Prince Leopold, died of hemophilia. He inherited the title Duke of Albany. His grandmother, Queen Victoria, was fond of him and insisted that he receive the Duchy of Saxe-Coburg and Gotha, the homeland of her beloved husband, Prince Albert. The 16-year-old fatherless prince was taken under the wing of his cousin, Kaiser Wilhelm. The English schoolboy was thoroughly transformed into a German soldier. The Titles Deprivation Act removed Charles Edward's title of prince and Duke of Albany. After World War I, he lost the Duchy of Saxe-Coburg and Gotha in the German Revolution. The bitter former prince believed Adolf Hitler's promise to restore his throne, and he joined the Nazi Party. He spied at the funeral of his cousin, George V. 3 of his sons served in the war, and 1 was killed in action. After Hitler's defeat, Charles Edward was charged with crimes against humanity. He avoided imprisonment because of his age, but he was left impoverished. In 1953, he watched the coronation of his cousin, Queen Elizabeth II, at a local cinema. He died of cancer the following year at 69. Edward VIII, King of the UK, known as David within his family, was the eldest son of King George V. He was invested as Prince of Wales in 1911. In his 20s, he served in World War I, but the government refused to put the heir to the throne in harm's way. His good looks, style, and playboy lifestyle made him a celebrity. The palace worked desperately to suppress his many romantic scandals, including affairs with married women, and the murder trial of his former lover, who shot her husband in Paris. David had little interest in hard work. Both his parents and the government dreaded the day he would become king. That day was January 20th, 1936. The 41-year-old king was deep into a relationship with twice-married American socialite Wallis Simpson. She was also sleeping with the German ambassador, who was spying for Hitler. The king intended to wed Wallis, but as head of the Church of England, his marriage to a divorced person would spark a constitutional crisis. The Prime Minister advised him to either give up Wallis or give up the throne. He chose to keep Wallis and announced his abdication after just 11 months on the throne. The public was shocked. His younger brother became King George VI. It was up to him to decide how to deal with a living former king. He couldn't go back to being Prince of Wales, as that title was needed for future heirs. Instead, he was created Duke of Windsor and ordered to leave the country. Edward and Wallis married in France. As they had no intention of being working royals, they were not eligible for a taxpayer-funded allowance. But King George paid his brother from his own pocket. He denied Wallis the right to be addressed as Her Royal Highness, and Edward called his brother daily to complain and demand more money. The Duke and Duchess visited Nazi Germany and met Adolf Hitler. The Führer planned to install Edward as a puppet king when he invaded Britain. So Winston Churchill got the dangerous former king out of Europe by appointing him governor of the Bahamas. There he expressed many racist views and told friends he blamed the Roosevelts and the Jews for the war. In 1945, Edward and Wallis returned to France. They lived a celebrity lifestyle and doted on their pet pugs. They made ends meet through illegal currency trading. Edward watched his niece Elizabeth's coronation on TV. He suffered an aneurysm and throat cancer. In 1972, Elizabeth came to visit her prodigal uncle. He died 10 days later at 77 and was buried at Frogmore. Want even more tea on history? Check out the History Tea Time podcast. If you enjoyed this video, please like, subscribe, comment your thoughts, and check out my other history videos. You can also support my work, get early access to all my multi-part series, and other perks by becoming a channel member or joining my Patreon. Thank you for watching.